Hey, Boat Dragons, I'm so glad you joined me today. We're going to talk about how reading has changed. It's changed drastically even since I was a kid. That's not even taking into account how much it has changed since the first books came to be. So we're not going to go all the way back historically and talk about all that, but we are going to talk about how things have changed, let's say within the last 50 years, because that's the time span that I have been around. I see such a huge shift in what reading looks like now compared to when I first was born, and some of those changes are good, and some of those changes are maybe not so good. We shall see. But we're going to get into it today, and I'm going to talk about this from three different vantage points. We're going to start talking about the reading experience, just what it's like to be reading now versus when I was a kid. And then we're going to talk about book ownership and book pricing. So we're going to take it from those three different vantage points. Going to put my eyes on here because I do have some notes that I want to refer back to make sure I'm hitting all my points clearly. And I hope you really enjoy this video. I hope it's valuable to you. Let's get into it. And we are going to start, of course, with the reading experience, because I think that is probably the most important part of it for all of us, right? Okay, and it used to be in the old days, what we'll call them the old days. Back in the old days, we only read from physical books. Even before I was born, at some point, there weren't a whole lot of physical books even. Some were serials in magazines and things like that. So there were a lot of stories that were later compiled into books. Frank Herbert's Dune started out like that. And so eventually books became more mainstream. We got large bookstores coming into the market and things like that. Barnes and Noble came on the scene. Walden Books was on the scene. All of those places that you could buy physical books to own, and libraries have been a thing forever, right? So there were always places that you could access books, whether for owning them or for borrowing them. Or, you could borrow books from your friends and things like that. But the reading experience was always mostly the same. It was always physical books. Unless you needed to look at some really old books on microfiche film, you would go to the library for that. So that's the only thing that wasn't really a physical book at the time, but it was a scan of a physical book. So there were ways that you could do a little bit of reading without having to open up a book, but most of the time it was just the physical book that you either borrowed or bought. As we all know, the reading experience has drastically changed. And most of it for the good, I would say. We now have access to e-readers and e-books. We have access to audiobooks, which audiobooks have been around for a while, but it was mostly books on tape. And then when CDs came out, it was books on CD. Those weren't always very accessible. So not a lot of people did the audiobooks unless they just had to. But now we have access to audiobook services where you can just crank up an audiobook on your phone and either listen to it with headphones or play it in your car. That experience has drastically changed the reading landscape. And ebooks and e-readers are a thing as well. So we have so many different ways to digest books now than we used to, and I think that's mostly a good thing. Now, there are some restrictions on that when you get into some of the subscription models, like Kindle Unlimited and Kobo Plus and things like that, where they want you to sign up for their subscription model so you can read as many books as you want. And some of those subscription models are limited, but you get access to a wide variety of books that you might not have read otherwise, and you're doing it mostly because they're quote-unquote free. Even though they're not free, you're paying for the service, but for that price you're getting access to a whole lot more books at once. But you're not owning those books. And that's where I think we need to shift a little bit now to talk about book ownership. because this is a huge piece of how reading has changed. Now, it used to be that all the books you bought, you owned. There was no question about it. It's yours. Like, I bought this copy of Fire and Blood by George R. R. Martin. This is mine. Nobody's going to come to my door and take it away from me. At least not yet, unless Fahrenheit 451 becomes a thing. I mean, you never know, I guess. But right now, nobody's going to come and take this book away from me. I own it. So the only way it's going to not be mine any longer is if I someday unhaul this, take it to the used bookstore. That's not going to happen, folks. I love this book. It's mine. So physical books, we have always been able to own and have in our libraries and look at it on the shelf and say, that's my book. But that is not the case with ebooks, or it hasn't been for a while now. I think when ebooks first came to the market, there was kind of a sense of ownership. You owned that book, you could download the books, you could save them to a hard drive, and in some cases you can still do that. But in the majority of cases now, there is what we call digital rights management. Publishers and booksellers are selling us a license to the book, but not ownership of the book. That license guarantees that the book is yours as long as the license does not expire. If for some reason the license expires or the terms of the license are changed, you may no longer have access to that book. There are ways with some e-readers to download your books and save them to a hard drive still so that you can access them and put them on other devices and retrieve them if you somehow lose the books off your device. But there are things that have been happening lately that have caused that to become much harder. Amazon stopped allowing it, for example. And so now, unless you have downloaded all your books previously, you can't ever own your Kindle books, really. And there are other distributors that have a similar model depending on the agreements with publishers and things like that. So it's a very sketchy landscape as to whether you actually own your books when you are buying a digital version. And a lot of times you're spending right around the same price as you would for a physical book to own that ebook, and yet it's not always yours. And it's becoming like that with all of the media that we consume. If you buy a digital movie, it's a license. If you buy a digital game, it's a license. And so this is what the market is changing to, and I don't like it. I don't think it's a good model for consumers, but in some cases we're stuck. That's really all we can do unless we buy all physical media again. Unless I go out and buy all the books that I have on my e-reader and say, okay, well now I've got physical copies of them, and that's not really practical for most people. If you have a large house or if you have a room that's completely devoted to books, maybe. But that's not most consumers. So book ownership, I think, is probably the biggest thing that has changed about reading and about how we consume books. Let's move on from ownership and talk about pricing. And this is where it gets really heavy and has the potential to get heavier. And we're going to start, I think, with ebook pricing. I think ebook pricing is the elephant in the room, because I just mentioned a few minutes ago that oftentimes with ebooks, you are paying the same price, sometimes even higher price for an ebook than you would pay for the regular mass market paperback or a trade paperback. Sometimes you're paying more for the ebook, and it's getting really out of hand. For a digital file, publishers are just insane for charging the prices that they do. And a lot of times, if it's a really popular book or a really popular series, people will pay that price. I am not immune to that. I have done it because I wanted to read a certain book on day one. But my personal practice is, if I don't have a gift card or something like that where it's not my actual money paying for it, then I really won't buy the ebook at full price unless I just absolutely have to have it. In that situation, is there a reason why I don't just go buy the physical book? I can always unhaul it later if I don't want to keep the physical book, right? So there's ways around that, but ebook pricing is getting really out of hand. I have seen ebooks from Stephen King that are priced at $18.99. I've seen other popular books priced at $14.99 for an ebook, and that is insane. And I think it's going to get more insane in terms of pricing on ebooks. But that's the big elephant in the room when it comes to ebooks. Let's move on and talk about some of the subscription models that are out there. Right now, and I could be wrong, but I believe that Kindle Unlimited is currently charging $11.99 a month for their service, and you do get access to all the Kindle Unlimited books. There's some really popular series that are available on Kindle Unlimited, like the Murderbot series, and I believe some of the Dragonlance books are on there as well. But most of the time, it's self-published authors that are using Kindle Unlimited, like myself. I'm one of those, and there's some really great self-published books out there that are using Kindle Unlimited. So that's not a bad thing, but it's that pricing structure. If you're paying $11.99 and you're only borrowing one book a month from that program, if that, you might go 2 or 3 months without borrowing a book from Kindle Unlimited, but at least it's there. It's there if I need it. And if you're doing that, you're basically donating money to Amazon without actually using the product. So I'm guilty of that. I'm not judging anyone because I have done that. I do subscribe to Kindle Unlimited, and I don't use it as much as I should. But those subscription models can get really pricey. I know Everance is a subscription model out there. It used to be called Scribd. It's now Everance, and they have a similar price. I think Kobo Plus is probably the cheapest out there at, I think, $8.99, or maybe it's $9.99, but it's still, close to $10 a month for a service that you may or may not use all the time. Those are only slated to go up, I feel like, because of the economy right now. I just feel like we're going to see those subscription models going up and up. And then if you're paying for Book of the Month or other book clubs like Illumicrate or Broken Binding, then you've got those expenses as well. And on that note, I think it's time to transition to talking about special editions. But before that, I do want to talk a little bit about scarcity. There are certain books out there that are very hard to come by. They're very hard to find copies of. And so when you hear about a special edition coming out for them, you think, oh, well, this is a great opportunity for me to get that book that I've just been dying to read. And one of those for me was The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. At one time, this book was only available in the UK, and it was only available in physical form. There wasn't an ebook version. There is now, but there wasn't back then. And it was hard to come by. I have a friend here in town that has it and had let me borrow the first book to read it, but I enjoyed it enough that I wanted to own the rest of the series. And at the time, The Broken Binding was the only way to own that series because of scarcity. It just wasn't available here in the U.S. And so I finally did get a copy of it. I got a copy of the Broken Binding editions. The same friend that let me borrow the book found them for me in a local used bookstore, and they had the books there, and so I'm like, oh, okay, that's great, and they're really nice. They've got the nice sprayed edges and everything. It's a great book, and I still need to read the other books in the series. But you get my drift. It wasn't always available on all the formats we wanted, and so I had that. And some of these special edition models do provide us with access to books that we may not have gotten otherwise. The Broken Binding recently did a new hardcover edition of Hyperion by Dan Simmons, and that hasn't been available in a new edition for decades. It's always been the same little mass market paperback with the same covers, which are gorgeous covers. I love them. But they just weren't available in any other format. And so now you're starting to get that, but you have to go with a special edition for it. And that's fine. That's great. But special editions, I think, will get a whole lot pricier, because a lot of the special editions come from the UK. Another case in point is Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. This is my Illumicrate edition, and I have a friend who was nice enough to give this to me. I love it, but who knows what pricing is going to look like for Illumicrate editions in the future, because they are based in the UK, and you have to deal with overseas shipping costs. And now, especially in the US, with the tariffs that are being threatened and actually executed on, who knows what it is going to cost to get special editions from overseas. It really is a changing landscape as far as pricing goes there, because right now we don't know what to expect. Every time the tariffs are threatened and the day they're due to go live, they usually end up rolling them back, but they're still being threatened, and one country has not had the tariffs removed from it at all. And so when those tariffs are executed, those are executed at the time of entry into the US. So if I buy a book from, say, Illumicrate or Broken Binding, and I pay, let's say, $50 for it, by the time I get it, I may actually have to pay more, say $70, $80, just to get the book from the shipping dock delivered to me. So it's really hard to say what that's going to look like right now. It doesn't look like it's getting any better. And so many things are changing about reading. Most of them I feel like are good. I love my e-readers. I read about 90% of my books on my e-readers, and my e-reader is going to last me probably for 5 years or more. I'm not going to have to buy another one, so I wouldn't have to pay tariffs on a new e-reader or anything like that. But if I'm wanting to get physical books and special editions even, it's hard to know what that is going to look like. I think it's going to change the face of publishing, because it does cost a lot to print a book and print multiple copies of that book to get it in bookstores, and especially if you're having to ship stock from overseas, which a lot of booksellers have to do. It's hard to know what that's going to look like price-wise. And so there are some big things that have changed reading, and most of them are good, but some of them are not good, and some of them we won't know what that change is going to be for maybe a year or a couple of years, and then reevaluate it and see where things are at. Maybe it's going to be a lot harder for a lot of people to purchase physical books, and we may see more people switching over to e-readers just because of the cost of buying books in a digital format, if you're willing to stick to waiting on the deals, which I try to do mostly. I really like to wait until there's a deal on a book, but sometimes there isn't a deal and you really want to read that book and you're just going to buy it. But a lot of times ebooks are cheaper, so I'm wondering, with some of these new changes in pricing structures for books, if a lot more people are going to be switching over to e-readers or using their library more. That's a really great option as well. But even libraries are being targeted with restriction of funding and things like that. So I'm really hoping that libraries don't just go away. But for right now, you can do ebooks, you can do library books to offset some of the costs involved with the pricing. This is an interesting conversation to me, and I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know what you're thinking about how the reading experience has changed, about how book ownership has changed and the prices of books and different subscription models, things like that. I'd love to hear from you. what your thoughts are. Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, guys, make sure you read more books, whatever those books look like. Make sure you're reading them. And also, if you're interested, I've got other videos in the cards at the end of this video that you can watch and enjoy. Till next time.